My name is Danica Rowe, and I was 32 years old when I finally understood that generosity, when left unprotected, becomes a liability. I didn't come to that realization in a moment of screaming or broken glass. It arrived quietly, like a bone cracking under pressure it had been carrying for years. To understand why I eventually made my parents homeless, you need to understand my brother, Maxwell Rowe. Growing up, my parents had two children. Maxwell, 37 now, their miracle son, and me, the daughter they accidentally turned into a financial plan. The difference in how we were treated wasn't subtle. It was a canyon, wide enough to swallow logic, deep enough to erase resentment until it hardened into something else. When I was 16, I worked two jobs. I stocked shelves at a grocery store before school and waited tables at a diner after. I bought my own notebooks, my own clothes, my own groceries. I smelled like fryer grease and floor cleaner more often than perfume. Maxwell, meanwhile, dropped out of community college. Not graduated, dropped out. My parents bought him a brand new Mustang to encourage his independence. I took the bus. Every night, I came home with blistered feet, grease in my hair, and homework still undone. I would set the table with food I'd paid for myself while my parents praised Maxwell for finding his path. Family takes care of family, my mother would say, beaming at him. What she meant was, I take care of Maxwell, Maxwell takes care of Maxwell, and everyone pretends this is love. The breaking point came during my senior year of high school. I had done everything right. Maintained a strong GPA, took AP classes, worked nearly 40 hours a week, and I had a college fund, $45,000, that I'd been promised since I was 10 years old. It wasn't extravagant, but it was hope. It was my exit. Then Maxwell decided he wanted to be a music producer. I came home one Wednesday afternoon to find my parents sitting at the kitchen table, paperwork spread out between them. My stomach dropped before my mother even spoke. Sweetie, we need to talk about your college fund. I already knew. What about it? I asked anyway. My father leaned forward, voice tight with rehearsed justification. There's a music production program in Los Angeles, equipment, studio time, connections. This is Maxwell's moment. You're not touching my college fund, I said. My hands were shaking. That money is for my education. We had an agreement. My mother's expression hardened. Don't be selfish. You're smart. You'll get scholarships. Maxwell needs this more than you need some fancy university. Maxwell had lived rent-free in our basement for 18 months, buying limited edition sneakers and video games. But sure, he was the one who needed help. No, I said, that's my future. My father stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. We're your parents. That money is under our name. We've made our decision. I felt tears burn my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. You promised me. You were promised nothing, my mother snapped. Be grateful you get to help your brother. They emptied my college fund the next day. Every dollar. Maxwell bought recording equipment, paid for studio time, and still somehow managed to afford a gaming setup worth more than my car. Within 6 months, the money was gone. So was his dream. I went to state college on partial scholarships and exhaustion. I worked 3 jobs. My parents never helped, not once. They didn't even attend my graduation. Maxwell had an online tournament. At 24, I landed my first real job at a prestigious insurance firm. I didn't tell my parents, but Maxwell found out anyway. 2 months later, they showed up at my office, unannounced, claiming I was mentally unstable. They stayed for 3 hours. The next day, I was fired. They said they were worried. They said they were helping. That was the moment I stopped believing I could survive them without losing something. And I was right. If losing my college fund taught me who my parents favored, losing my first real job taught me what they were capable of. After they got me fired, they didn't apologize. They didn't even pretend regret. We were worried about you, my mother said over the phone, voice thick with performative concern. You've been so distant. We thought intervening might help. Help? I whispered. My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit on the floor. You destroyed my career. Well, my father added calmly, maybe that job was too stressful for you. You should come home, live with us for a while. We'll take care of you. Take care of me. In the same house where Maxwell, now 31, still lived rent-free, streaming video games to an audience of 4 people and calling it a career. Absolutely not. That was the moment I understood something fundamental. Information was their weapon. So I stopped giving it to them. I didn't tell them where I applied next. I used a friend's address for mail. I locked down my social media so tightly that even distant relatives couldn't see a profile picture. I stopped answering calls immediately. I became careful in ways I hadn't known were necessary. It felt paranoid. It was survival. The next few years were brutal. I rebuilt my career quietly, painfully, and alone. I worked 70-hour weeks, took contract jobs no one wanted, slept in apartments where I could hear my neighbors argue through paper-thin walls. I learned to budget down to the dollar, to eat cheaply, to move silently. There were nights I cried into my pillow, not because I missed my parents, but because I couldn't believe how disposable I'd been to them. Every time I made progress, I waited for the other shoe to drop. Because with my family, it always did. Maxwell never called to ask how I was doing. My parents only reached out when they needed something. Money, advice, validation. I learned to say no without explaining. That didn't stop them from trying. My mother left long voicemails about how families should reconnect. My father sent articles about adult children who regretted cutting off their parents. I deleted them all. By 28, I had finally stabilized. By 29, I was promoted. By 30, I did something I never thought I'd be able to do. I bought a house. A real one. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a small backyard, a mortgage with my name and only my name on it. A modest place in a quiet Tacoma neighborhood. The day I got the keys, I sat on the empty living room floor and cried. Not loud, ugly sobs. Quiet tears. Relief. Pride. The strange disbelief that I had survived my family long enough to build something permanent. And then I made the mistake that nearly destroyed everything. I told my parents. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted them to be proud. Maybe I wanted proof that I mattered beyond what I could provide. They came for a visit 2 weeks later. The moment my mother stepped inside, her eyes began scanning, measuring, calculating. "This is too big for one person," she said, running her hand along the kitchen counter. "You must get lonely." "I like the space," I replied carefully. "I have friends over." My father wandered down the hallway, opening closet doors, checking windows. "You know who would love this?" he said casually. "Maxwell." My stomach tightened. "He's been feeling cramped in the basement," my mother added quickly. "A change of scenery could help his creativity." "Maxwell isn't moving in," I said flatly. They smiled. Too fast. Too practiced. "We're not saying he should," my mother said. "Just family helps family." The seed was planted. Over the next 2 months, it grew. Every call turned into a guilt trip. Every text referenced Maxwell's mental health. Every conversation ended with the same phrase. Family takes care of family. I stood firm. This house wasn't just a place to live. It was proof that they hadn't broken me. Then I went on vacation. Just 1 week in Hawaii with my 3 closest friends, Amanda, Courtney, and Jess. We'd planned it for 2 years, saved meticulously, coordinated schedules like it was a military operation. It was supposed to be my reward. The day I landed back in Seattle, something felt wrong before I even reached my street. My Uber slowed to a stop and I saw it. My father's old cherry red Suburban, blocking my driveway. My heart started hammering. They weren't supposed to be there. I paid the driver with shaking hands and dragged my suitcase up the walkway. I pulled out my key, slid it into the lock, and turned. Nothing. I tried again. The key didn't fit. This wasn't my lock. Panic rose like bile in my throat. I pounded on the door. Seconds later, my father opened it, smiling. "Danica," he said pleasantly, "you're back early." "What did you do?" I demanded. "Why doesn't my key work?" He blocked the doorway. "We changed the locks," he said, "for security reasons." Security reasons. My mother appeared behind him, and over her shoulder, I saw Maxwell sprawled across my couch, holding a controller, gaming on a massive television I definitely didn't own. "I'm calling the police," I said, pulling out my phone. "Go ahead," my father replied calmly. "We have every right to be here." When the officers arrived, my father handed over a deed. A fake one. Professional looking enough to cause doubt. "This appears to be a civil matter," the officer said apologetically. "You'll need to resolve this in court." They left. And just like that, I was a guest in my own home. That night, lying on a borrowed bed in the guest room, listening to Maxwell laugh loudly through the wall, something inside me finally snapped into clarity. They weren't going to stop. They were never going to stop. And if I wanted my life back, I couldn't play fair anymore. Living as a guest in my own house was a special kind of psychological torture. Every morning, I woke up disoriented, momentarily forgetting where I was, until I heard Maxwell's voice booming through the walls, shouting at strangers through his headset, laughing like he owned the place. Because in his mind, he did. My kitchen was no longer mine. My refrigerator was stocked with food I hadn't bought. My mother's decorative rooster collection had appeared overnight, lining the countertops like territorial markers. They hadn't just moved in. They had claimed my home. At breakfast, my mother acted as if this was all temporary and reasonable. "You'll feel better once you adjust," she said, stirring her coffee. "Change is hard for you. Hard for me." Maxwell didn't even acknowledge the tension. He slept until noon, left dirty dishes everywhere, and complained loudly when the internet lagged. "This house is perfect for streaming," he said one afternoon, stretching on my couch. "Way better than the basement." I stared at him, thinking of my empty college fund, of the jobs I'd worked, of the years I'd lost. I said nothing, because silence had become strategy. That first night, I locked the guest room door and lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I replayed everything the lawyer had said earlier that day. Months, maybe years. Years of watching them live comfortably in the home I'd earned, while they smiled and reminded me how grateful I should be. No, I couldn't survive that. So I did something that terrified me. I adapted. The next morning, I became the daughter they wanted. I cooked breakfast, cleaned the kitchen, complimented my mother's roosters, asked my father about his blood pressure medication. I apologized. "I know I've been distant," I said softly. "I just want us to be a family again." They ate it up, especially Maxwell. I started spending time in the living room, watching him stream, asking questions I didn't care about. How do you grow your audience? What games are best for engagement? What's your long-term plan? He loved it. No one had ever shown interest in his career without asking for proof. By day 4, he was bragging. By day 5, he trusted me. That night, my parents announced they were going out to dinner. "Family night," my mother said brightly. "You should come." "I've got a headache," I replied, pressing my fingers to my temple. "I'll stay home." Maxwell barely looked up from his controller. The moment their Suburban backed out of the driveway, I moved. I went straight to the master bedroom. My bedroom. His computer sat there humming quietly. Multiple monitors, external drives, expensive equipment, much of it purchased with money that should have been my education. My hands were steady. That scared me most of all. What I did next wasn't impulsive. It wasn't emotional. It was precise. I searched for illegal content, the kind no one could explain away, the kind that erased doubt, the kind that guaranteed intervention. I found it faster than I want to admit. I downloaded over 2 terabytes. No VPN, no encryption, no protection. I created a folder labeled Personal Collection, and I left it in plain sight. When I finished, I packed a bag and left the house. I stayed with Amanda, telling my parents I needed a few days to clear my head. 2 days later, my phone exploded. News alerts. Police scanners. A SWAT raid. I turned on the live feed and watched officers in tactical gear storm my house. My front door was kicked in, windows shattered. Maxwell was dragged out in handcuffs, screaming. My parents were cuffed too, at least at first. My mother looked small. My father looked stunned. For the first time in my life, they had no control. While they were at the station, desperately trying to understand what was happening, I made my move. Amanda drove. Courtney and Jess met us there. The front door was gone. No lock to stop us. We worked like professionals. Every item my parents owned went into trash bags. Clothes, toiletries, roosters. Maxwell's gaming setup, every monitor, every console, every controller, followed. The couch he'd lounged on, the bed he'd slept in. I wouldn't touch anything I didn't want back. 6 hours later, the lawn looked like a yard sale from hell. I called a locksmith, changed every lock. Only I got keys. When my parents returned the next morning, exhausted, defeated, unable to scrape together bail, they found their belongings soaking in dew and the door locked. My mother pounded on the glass. "Danica!" she screamed. "This is insane! Your brother needs us!" I walked to the window, made sure she could see me. Then I smiled and closed the curtains. They screamed. They called the police. The same officer showed up. "Civil matter," he said again. This time it worked in my favor. They left, homeless. And for the first time in my life, my house was silent. I sank onto the floor and laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was over. And because I knew, whatever came next, there was no going back. The silence didn't feel peaceful at first. It felt unreal. For 3 days after my parents were forced out, I walked through my house like it belonged to someone else. I half expected my mother to reappear in the kitchen, clutching her coffee mug, or Maxwell to shout from the living room about lag. Neither happened. Instead, there were police cars driving by slowly, neighbors whispering, a news van parked down the street for a full afternoon. I didn't leave the house. I didn't need to. Everything I had worked for was finally behind locked doors, doors only I could open. Maxwell was charged within 48 hours. The evidence was overwhelming. The folder, the downloads, the timestamps. My parents insisted it had to be a mistake, that someone had framed him, that their son would never. But the problem with being the golden child is that no one ever learns how to clean up their own messes. The public defender didn't believe him. The detectives didn't believe him. And when forensic analysts confirmed the files had been accessed repeatedly over months, no one believed him. My parents called me constantly. I didn't answer. They left messages that swung wildly between fury and desperation. "You have to help us," my mother sobbed in one voicemail. "Your brother is innocent." In the next message, my father's voice was cold and sharp. "If you don't come forward and fix this, don't ever call us family again." Family. The word had lost its meaning. The arraignment happened a week later. I watched from the back of the courtroom, hidden behind a pair of large sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low. Maxwell stood at the defense table, pale and trembling, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. For the first time in his life, there was no one to step in front of him, no one to redirect blame, no one to shield him. My parents sat behind him, gripping each other's hands so tightly their knuckles were white. When the charges were read, my mother let out a sound that didn't even register as human. I didn't feel joy. I felt something colder. Completion. The trial took 2 years. 2 long, grinding years where my parents burned through every resource they had trying to save him. They sold their house, the house they'd lived in for decades, the house they should have retired in. They drained their retirement accounts, borrowed from relatives, took out loans they'd never repay. It didn't matter. The evidence was airtight. Maxwell was sentenced to 8 years in prison. 8 years for something he never even knew was on his computer. But no one believed that. How could they? It was his equipment, his account, his room. Intent didn't matter anymore. My parents lost everything. Their home, their savings, their future. They bounced between relatives' spare rooms, couches, and basements, places that came with conditions, resentment, and unspoken deadlines. I heard updates through distant family members who suddenly remembered I existed. "She's heartbroken," one aunt said. "They're struggling," a cousin whispered. I nodded politely and changed the subject. Sometimes, late at night, I think about what I did. I think about Maxwell sitting in a concrete cell, staring at walls that don't care whether he's guilty or not. I think about my parents aging in borrowed spaces, replaying every decision they ever made. And then I remember my empty college fund. I remember the office lobby where my mother cried fake tears while my boss watched in horror. I remember packing my desk in silence while coworkers avoided my eyes. I remember unlocking my front door after vacation and realizing it wasn't mine anymore. And whatever doubt creeps in, it dissolves. Because monsters aren't born. They're built, brick by brick, lie by lie, sacrifice by sacrifice. I didn't wake up one day wanting revenge. I woke up tired of surviving people who would never stop hurting me. A few months after the trial ended, I started dating again. Nothing serious at first. And then I met Greg, a software engineer. Quiet, thoughtful. The kind of man who listens without trying to fix you. On our 3rd date, I told him everything. I expected horror, judgment, maybe fear. Instead, he sat quietly for a long time. Then he said, "You deserve better. No excuses, no moral lectures. Just truth." Sometimes he jokes that my family stories sound like a thriller. Other times, he holds my hand when I wake up from dreams where my key doesn't fit the lock. I changed the locks 3 more times. Installed a full security system. Cameras everywhere. Not because I'm afraid they'll come back, but because peace is something I protect now. I used to wonder if I was the villain in this story. Maybe I am. But I'm a villain with a house. With a life. With a future that belongs entirely to me. They wanted to take everything from me one last time. So I made sure they never could again. Freedom didn't arrive with fireworks. It crept in quietly, through locked doors, steady routines, and the unfamiliar absence of dread. For months after Maxwell was sentenced, I lived in a strange emotional vacuum. There was no court date to anticipate, no crisis to manage, no family emergency demanding my attention. My phone stayed silent. My weekends belonged to me. I didn't know what to do with that at first. I had spent my entire life reacting, anticipating my parents' needs, adjusting to Maxwell's failures, bracing for the next boundary they'd cross. Without them, there was nothing to push against. So I built something new. I repainted the living room a soft gray they would have hated. I replaced the couch, threw out every last rooster. I turned the guest room, the one I'd been forced into an office with a desk by the window and shelves I filled slowly, deliberately, with books I actually wanted. I slept better. Not perfectly, but better. Some nights I still jolted awake, heart racing, convinced I'd hear my mother's voice calling my name through the door or my father insisting I was overreacting. Those moments passed more quickly than they used to. Because the locks held. Because the cameras stayed dark. Because the house stayed quiet. Greg became a steady presence in my life, not as a savior, not as a shield, but as a witness. He never tried to minimize what I'd done, never asked me to apologize for it. Once, over dinner, he said something that stayed with me. "You didn't destroy your family," he said calmly. "You stopped letting them destroy you." I didn't answer right away. For a long time, I had framed my story as a single, explosive act, a line crossed, a life derailed. But in truth, what I did was the final move in a game that had started decades earlier. They had taught me the rules. I just played them better. I heard occasional updates about my parents. They moved often, stayed where they could. Relationships frayed under the weight of constant need and unresolved grief. Relatives stopped answering their calls. Offers of help dried up. The world treated them the way they had always treated me. Transactional, conditional, impatient. Sometimes I wondered if they understood. If, lying awake in someone else's guest room, they ever replayed the moments where things could have gone differently. If my mother remembered the day she called me selfish for protecting my future. If my father remembered standing in my office lobby, lying about my sanity with a straight face. If either of them remembered the daughter who worked herself raw just to earn the right to leave. They never reached out again. Not to apologize. Not to ask why. Just silence. And I let it remain that way. On the anniversary of buying my house, I invited Amanda, Courtney, and Jess over. We drank wine on the back patio and laughed until it hurt. At some point, Courtney raised her glass and said, "To surviving." I corrected her gently. To living. Because survival implies danger is still present. And it isn't. I don't pretend what I did was moral in any clean, simple sense. I don't dress it up as justice or karma. I understand exactly how far I went, and why most people would judge me for it. That's fine. Judgment doesn't pay mortgages. Morality didn't protect me as a child. And forgiveness never stopped them before. What stopped them was consequence. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one absorbing it. I was the one who decided where it landed. Sometimes when I water the plants in my backyard or lock the door at night, I think about the version of myself who stood in this same house months earlier. Suitcase in hand, key useless, heart racing. I wish I could tell her something. Not that it will all be okay, but that one day she will stop asking permission to exist. That one day she will choose herself without hesitation. That one day she will understand that love that demands sacrifice without reciprocation isn't love at all. It's control. And control only works as long as you allow it. I don't know what kind of person this makes me. Villain, survivor, both. What I do know is this. The house is mine. The life is mine. The future, finally, is mine. And no one gets to take it from me ever again.